Hello, this is Dan Ferrisi, Editor-in-Chief with Commercial Integrator and host of the AV Plus podcast. Really excited to welcome you to the AV Plus podcast, the podcast for the commercial AV integration industry. We have a great guest this week, Jeff Singer, who is an industry marketing veteran, currently doing consulting. And the topic of conversation is something that really kind of rose to the fore, we think, at ISE, and we want to explore it today. That is, who owns the room? And if manufacturers and those in our industry do aspire to own the room, how can they do that? What kind of pivots might they have to make? What kind of new skill sets might they have to broaden? It's all coming to you today on AV Plus.
As always, please like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please subscribe to the AV Plus podcast on Apple and on Spotify.
This podcast is sponsored by ViewSonic. ViewSonic just launched their CDE 30 series of 4K high brightness displays. They range from 43 to 98 inches and are ViewSonic's most connected displays yet, with HDMI 2.1 input, HDMI 2.0 output, USB-C direct connectivity, local and remote display management, and certified AV control system interoperability. Check out the link in the show notes to learn more. Jeff, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure to welcome you back on the AV Plus podcast.
Wonderful to be back, Dan. And it was fun running into you at ISE, and I'm glad we're able to get together and follow up.
I feel the same way. ISE was such a whirlwind, and I'm sure it was the same for you, that any 5 minutes or 10 minutes I was able to find with someone on the show floor was kind of a precious oasis because I was just running from booth to booth and event to event. But I'm glad we had an opportunity to catch up. And I'm glad we had an opportunity to talk a little bit about the trend we've seen, which is even with supply chain issues and other kind of mitigating factors, there still does seem to be a drive for people to quote unquote own the room. That still seems to be top of mind for a lot of vendors these days. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. That was, I think the words "own the room" I heard over and over again from manufacturer to manufacturer. It's been said other ways, a complete solution, an end-to-end solution, a fully integrated solution, whatever. But the market seems to be wanting, if not expecting, a pallet to arrive with everything they need for that room on that pallet, a single SKU. I think you and I were calling it the kitification of the industry, so saw a lot of that. And I also saw a lot of the manufacturers, if not some of them actually completely, the pendulum swinging completely the other way from product to solutions. And some of them had a very varying degrees of a balance between showing individual product, hardware, and showing rooms, room solutions. Here's my courtroom, here's my meeting room, here's my conference room, here's my classroom and my interactive classroom. And that's something that we've not really seen a lot of at industry trade shows before.
Yeah, I certainly noticed that. And this trade show, not only because of its size and scope and the number of people, but also because of that kind of in situ focus, felt very different to me. I'm accustomed to going to trade shows and you go to see, large booths and they're adorned with a whole lot of black boxes. And underneath the black boxes, there's descriptive text about what the SKU is and what the specs are, et cetera. But when I was walking around ISE, what I saw were, mock all hands rooms and mock conference rooms and mock classrooms, and essentially seeing technology in its proper context. These companies are largely saying we have end-to-end solutions, or we aspire to have end-to-end solutions, so that when you're looking to outfit that all hands room or that conference room or that training room, whatever the case is, you come to us as your go-to end-to-end solution provider. Is that a vision that our industry really is able to deliver on, though? Because that's an ambitious vision, even amid the kitification of the industry. That requires a familiarity with software and kind of operational considerations that I don't know that historically we have shown ourselves to have all that much familiarity with.
Well, I completely agree with you. Our industry historically it's hardware focused, just like you said, all the usual suspects, won't name names right now, but, they have hardware devices on a shelf. You're used to picking them up, turning them around, looking at the inputs and outputs on the back end, and really thinking of it and really talking and thinking about it from a specific product or device perspective. Now we're really starting to look at and think about, what is the customer experience? What is the experience that we're providing the end user? What problems are we solving for the end user? What's interesting is, on the hardware side, I think there's a couple of ways that manufacturers are trying to solve this. In the end, I think what we're really looking at is making products interoperable. Some are white labeling and OEMing, some are building their own. But what was interesting is, the customers in the market want interoperability. Everybody, the dealers, the integrators are talking about interoperability. And I think the way that a lot of the manufacturers are doing that is, just either opening up their APIs, they're embedding experiences like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, even Google Meet, I saw a lot of now, where they're embedding those experiences into their hardware. The other thing is, like, this whole owning the room, it seems like everybody now has intelligent video or pan-tilt zoom cameras, or smart sound bars, or audio video sound bars, and all-in-one sound, these USB or all-in-one sound bars. And it kind of seems like we're all kind of sourcing it from the same places. There are a few sources and everybody's putting their name on it, but we're all kind of, at the end of the day, it seems, all the manufacturers selling, very similar, if not the same hardware, or sourcing the chips in their encoders and decoders for AV over IP, for example. They're kind of all getting the chipset from the same suppliers, 2 or 3 suppliers. So there's not a lot of difference there. So it seems to me that the real differentiation or the value is going to be on that front end experience. And that's going to be, as you are, I think, alluding to, the software. What is the experience, and how easy is it to provision or to configure a system? How easy is it to update or manage or support a system? How easy is it for the customers, the end users, to use those systems, those room systems? That comes down to the software coming full circle, not exactly in our DNA as an industry. Right.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And it's interesting that you're bringing up not only interoperability and open APIs, but also the ascendance of software and the need for us to be better at software developing and software integration as an industry. I don't know if you heard the AV Plus podcast the previous week, but I had on Steve Greenblatt and Brittany DeCesare from Control Concepts, who obviously have a long history at programming and things of that nature.
Right.
And they talked about how their key takeaway from ISC was this need to kind of pivot not only their business, but the industry as a whole toward software development and things of that nature, that they see that as the major opportunity, because software is the glue that's going to hold these systems together. So it's really fascinating that all these different people who had different experiences, different meetings at ISC, are all kind of coalescing around this idea that developing these software connections, this glue that's going to hold the systems together, is going to be absolutely essential to the welfare of our industry going forward. Whether you aspire to own the room or not, that is what people want to deliver the experiences that we are bound, but by our code of delivering what our clients want to deliver.
Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I'm actually very happy to hear that, because I've sort of been thinking this for a few years now, and I'm glad that we're moving in that direction, because I think it's inevitable. And if we don't move in that direction, we're going to become obsolete. So we do need to evolve, just like you were saying. And I think Steve's a really smart guy. I have a lot of respect for him. Whether you're a programmer a service provider, integrator, manufacturer, you're going to have to obsolete yourself. You're going to have to evolve, or you're going to probably go by the way of the dinosaurs. I mean, or you're going to become a much, much smaller company and more of a niche provider, which is okay too. You can be profitable and do that. So I think that companies are going to have a lot of decisions to make. Some of the larger players are probably going to decide to develop and create their own software it's going to be a homegrown solution. Others don't necessarily have the resources to do that and are hiring outside agencies, outside resources to develop the software for them. Now, what's interesting about that is now you're OEMing, you're going to an OEM for your software in much the same way as you were going to an OEM for your hardware. So how do you, if you do that, and it is a legitimate choice and a choice that many will have to make, how do you then differentiate yourself if your front end experience looks and your software looks very much like the next company's software? And other companies are doing it a couple of different ways. You can try to pay for exclusivity for a while and try to establish some, market share before you have others start to show up in the market with software that looks just like yours. Some companies might, if they're small enough, might be able to buy smaller companies. You buy them. I love the software that you developed for me. I'm now going to buy you, so that my competitors can't use the software that you've developed. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to see, how different companies solve that problem, short term and long term. And then the other thing that you brought up was owning the room. And of course, I can't help but get shivers thinking about, years ago when there was all this debate in the industry about who owns the code. And it's like, okay, so now you've delivered the room, you installed it, it's up and running, it's working. Now you may want to make changes. You may want to update it. You may, or as a customer, you may or may not be happy with the service you're getting from your provider. The provider may or may not have gone out of business. Now, what do you do? So these are some of the things that I'm starting to shudder a little bit when I'm like, okay, who owns the room? And also, what does ownership mean? Does it mean who owns has the responsibility for maintaining it and making sure that it works day to day? Is it, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid question, because we've been talking about some issues that kind of represent, at least in my mind, and maybe you can kind of disambiguate or clarify it for me, but some cross currents or some contradictions. We've been talking about the imperative to own the room and end-to-end solutions, and I certainly heard a lot of people talking about end-to-end solutions, the idea of trying to be your go-to provider. But we're also talking about interoperability. We're also talking about open APIs. I can't tell you how many people use the term closed garden in a pejorative sense at ISC because they don't want to feel locked in. They don't want to feel totally dependent on any one provider. So does that trend counter the idea of owning the room? Because does owning the room mean I am dependent on you? As you say, that can kind of give shivers up your spine, because what if the company goes out of business or anything else? Or does owning the room mean, more to your point that you started with, kind of kitification and the idea of having perhaps a single pane of glass for configuration and monitoring and management and control? That to me probably is much more palatable to people than the idea that it's going to be a closed garden and I can't do anything without your say-so and without your involvement. I think the single pane of glass may be the best form of owning the room. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think that, and I'm going to say it's the pardon the literary illusion, but I'm going to say it's the white whale that everybody is chasing. And I say that because, yes, I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways that people and companies can approach it, that question or that vision. And it can mean different things to different people. I think at the end of the day, it's the idea of what the market really wants. And I think where we can coalesce and align, where there's an alignment from what the manufacturers want to do and what the market wants, is around that idea of a single pane of glass. What I would caution people is that I'm not sure that a single pane of glass for everything is possible. I think it's sort of like perfection is not possible, but it doesn't stop us from pursuing it. And you may never get there, but you want to strive for it and get as close as you can. I think it's similar. We want to reduce the panes of glass, reduce the pane and the panes of glass that multiple panes of glass cause, by trying to reduce the number of panes of glass to get as much onto a single pane of glass as you can. We're not going to get life safety, your burglar alarms and your fire alarms and your sprinkler systems and your elevators and escalators. You're not getting that on this problem. We're not going to get that on the same pane of glass. So there's not going to be a single pane of glass for everybody to monitor everything. But I do think that idea, that concept is something that the market and the industry can coalesce around.
I think that is something that can be coalesced around, even with the caveats that you say, which is that, single may not literally mean single for every technology component, which is, very astutely observed. But at the same time, if there can be a streamlining largely with respect to configuration and monitoring, management, control, I think that is something that's going to align very well with what end users expect. And I think that may be the best form of the quote unquote owning the room, as opposed to a kind of a closed garden, locked in, no way around me kind of an approach where you almost feel handcuffed. I think that is definitely on the outs as far as what I'm hearing people want. But a single pane of glass, or at least a streamlining, software-based streamlining of management, is very much on brand and on target. I just want to ask you though, Jeff, because you've been an industry, you are an industry veteran, you've been around the industry a couple of decades, just like I have. Do you feel like dealers and manufacturers and integrators are kind of learning how to restructure themselves to sell software and to sell services and to sell configuration and monitoring? Because as well as I do, when we would go to Infocom 2005 or 2006, we'd be talking about selling hardware, and we would be talking about CapEx projects, and we would be talking about kind of hang and bang and one off, then you're on to the next project. Now, Commercial Integrator tries to beat the drum, and a lot of forward-thinking industry leaders like you try to beat the drum about pivoting and evolving and moving on to a different kind of a mindset. How much progress have we made as far as learning how to bill differently and do sales compensation differently and those kinds of things differently?
Yeah, you and I have talked about it before, and obviously, I feel the same way you do. We've been talking about the front end experience, selling a SKU, but then the whole back end operations, our industry is not set up to do that, generally speaking. There are a few distributors, there are distributors and some of your larger integrators that can do that. And are getting better at doing that. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, I don't think we've made a lot of progress. I think the progress that we have made is that more and more manufacturers and integrators recognize the need to do it. I think in the past, they either haven't recognized that at all, or they were kind of pushing back because they didn't want to do it. And now I think they're realizing, oh, I need to learn how to do that, because I'm not, set up my accounts payable or my accounting, my order tracking, we're not set up to, take a credit card. We're not set up to bill for this service monthly over 3 or 5 years. I can take a check, and I can deposit, I know how to do that, but we're not set up to do that. And then if we're not if it's more of an OpEx model where, you know, we're paying monthly or even annually, but you're not paying for it all up front, like you know, the CapEx expenditure of a piece of hardware. How do I bill it? How do I follow up with that? How do I, you know, compensate my sales team? You know, there's a commission, right? Do they get the full commission on what they sold on the total value, or are they getting a monthly commission check or you know, I mean, we're not set up to do that. How do we do that? And then, you know, the service level agreements in terms of, you know, phasing. You might have different features or different you know, phases of a project where, you know, we're on a 5-year license, but this phase started a year ago, this phase started 2 years ago, and now I'm starting another phase now, you know, and keeping track of all of that. You know, how do you do that, and how do you support it, and how do you service it, and what happens when it does need service or support, and then writing up your invoices and your contracts. You know, it's got to be some new legal language around that. I mean, I'm not an attorney, but, you know, I've watched some you know, TV shows that have law shows on TV. I happen to be married to one lawyer, but and you know, those contracts have to be rewritten. There has to be new language around that. And the other thing that we've always been terrible at, even on a CapEx, is, okay, fine, you know, you bought something from me today. We generally aren't good at going back to the customer and saying, hey, you know, did you have a really good experience with the room or the technology that I sold you 6 months ago? How, you know, and then going back and said, what about this? You know, do you need this, or do you need that, or would you like to do this, or would you like to do that? And kind of going back to the customer, and you know, you can call it customer share or wallet share or whatever you want, but we tend to be like, okay, I sold to them, now I'm on to the next customer. We don't go back to that customer and continue that relationship, or to extend or expand that relationship and continue to sell to them. I mean, some do, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not saying nobody does it, but I'm saying in general, we're not really good at that. So when you're selling software, you're selling OpEx, you've got to keep track of what licenses or features or subscriptions or whatever they have, and when they're going to run out.
Mhm.
Because there's two things. One, from a customer perspective, you don't want that. Well, you don't want them to run out for two reasons. One, from the customer's perspective, all of a sudden, none of my stuff works, right? Subscription ran out, just stopped working. That's a horrible experience.
Yeah.
And it just makes whoever the provider was in our industry, it just makes our industry look horrible, right? You need the stuff to keep working. So you want to be able to be engaged with the customer ahead of time and anticipate that they're going to have to get budgets, you know, proposed and approved, and, you know, and you want to have a continuous service, right? From a manufacturer and integrator's perspective, you know, you want the cash to keep flowing, right? I mean, that's recurring revenue. You want it to continue to recur. You know, you don't want to just run out, because that's the other thing. Maybe the service doesn't stop. Now they're just getting it free. You know, that's no good. So we really have to be able to track that and be able to support that, which we don't. There's security compliance. If everything is now, you know, software cloud-based, you know, there's security issues. You know, there's so much that we have to consider, and we're not really very good at it. But there are companies out there who do this. You know, and I think, you know, one of the things that Cedia did years ago that was mixed reviews, but I thought it was actually really important. They had a Cedia management conference where it really was, they didn't talk product, they didn't talk technology, they talked about how to run your business better.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if a VIXA, or maybe it could be maybe one of our industry media organizations like yours, somehow somebody or some groups can get together and sponsor like workshops or some seminars where there are these, IT VARs or other companies who operate this way. What do they do? How do they do it? How do you get, how do we transition from here to there? There must be some consulting firms that could help. I think that we need to get smart on what needs to be done and how to do it, because what it is we don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to get smart fast, and we need to actually affect change. We actually have to do it sooner rather than later. So a lot of talk, a lot of interest, but I don't think we've done it. And I think people are kind of stymied. I don't want to say paralleled, but they're a little stymied because they're not real sure what to do or how to do it, maybe.
I agree with you entirely. And as I've said a couple of times, you and I are industry veterans in some sense, having been around a couple of decades, and we love the industry. But one of the things when you love something or someone is you recognize both their perfections and their imperfections. And there's a lot of wonderful things about this industry, but there's also, in some sense, a sense to stagnate or to follow the models of the past, especially when it comes to business. Not necessarily the technology of the past, but the business models of the past. And Commercial Integrator, really, its raison d'etre is to help integrators run their business better. And I think the kind of training that you talk about could be incredibly valuable. And I hope perhaps Commercial Integrator Expo, when we debut at this upcoming September, might have some of those kind of seminars and some of those kinds of classes, because I think they potentially could be difference making for integration businesses, for manufacturers, for the channel up and down. Because there needs to be a transition, there needs to be a willingness to learn. And you talked about so many different things: billing considerations, sales compensation considerations, SLAs, security compliance, subscriptions, licensing. There's a lot to learn, but when we master that, when we actually really capture that, the recurring revenue potential and the long-term relationship potential, the way that we can revolutionize this business collectively as an industry, it makes all that sweat equity and that time and that learning more than worth it.
Yeah, I think, I hate to sound, pedantic or Pollyannic or whatever, but it's like, I think that our industry, while it might have been a luxury at one point, it's a necessity today. The market wants and needs what we do more than ever. But we need to kind of meet them where they are, and we need to evolve too. So if we can do that, I think that our industry will actually, as an industry, I'm not going to talk about, case by case basis, because everybody's going to have to do their own thing. But as an industry, I think we can grow exponentially. I think that there's so much. There are better days and bigger things ahead for us. And the other thing that I really want to stress, at least from my point of view, and I want to be clear because I know that there's some anxiety out there that, if we're going to this, service model, manufacturers are going to have that direct relationship with the customer, with the end user, and the integrators and so forth are going to be pushed out. And what about that? And I, from my perspective, and I don't have a horse in this race. I'm not with a dealer. I'm not with a manufacturer. I'm not with I'm on my own right now. So I don't have a horse in the race. I would say there absolutely is a way and a need for all of us. There's a need for all of us in the future. And there's a way that we can all move forward together. And we do need to be mindful of, okay, fine, if there is a service level agreement, if that is, let's say, with a manufacturer, where the manufacturer has to push out that firmware update or that feature activation or that license because it owns with the manufacturer, there has to be also a way that the integrator is getting their piece, is getting paid. As well, and a way to track all of that. So I'm sure there is a way, there must be a way, and that is something that we need to solve for because we don't want to leave anybody behind.
No, we don't. And to kind of button things up, Jeff, I think one thing you mentioned was the idea that the first step to solving a problem is kind of recognizing that the issue is going on and verbalizing it and talking about it. And I think you and I collectively have raised a number of concerns and issues, and we're not doing it for purposes of hand wringing. We're not doing it for purposes of making integrators or manufacturers breathe uneasy about where they stand. What we want to do is just kind of raise awareness. I think that was the drive behind you being on the podcast today, to raise awareness about these issues, because as soon as we're aware of the opportunity at our disposal, and I think we've tried to do that, then we start problem solving and ideating on how to get our hands around it. And then at ISE 2024 and beyond, perhaps we'll see an even further evolution of where we stand, a transformation, an evolution of our industries to be more future focused and more operational and more able to capitalize on the opportunities of tomorrow.
Couldn't agree with you more. Very well said. And I am confident that we will, because again, the other thing that I am constantly reminded as I walk around trade show floors like ISE is how enthusiastic and passionate and smart the people in our industry really are. We've got a lot of great people in our industry, and we're going to be okay.
We're
going to be better than okay. We're going to be great.
I agree, and I always appreciate the great people who come on the AV Plus podcast, one of whom is Jeff Singer, industry marketing veteran who's currently doing consulting. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being a recurring guest on the pod. Always appreciate your insights.
Absolutely. Anytime, Dan.
My name is Dan Ferrisi, editor-in-chief with Commercial Integrator and host of the AV Plus podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Please check back on commercialintegrator.com regularly for more thought leadership and multimedia content just like this. Have a great day.